In last week's homework, we spent some time going over loops, and I'd like to go over the solution for the most important part of the homework, and that was this one right here. So why is this important? Because when working with JavaScript, this is going to be one of the most common things that you're going to be doing. Meaning what? Meaning you have an array of objects, and we're going to want to iterate or loop over an array of objects. And they're probably going to be much more complicated than this, but the concept is generally the same. So let's focus a little bit more on the terminology here. First, we have an array that's denoted by these brackets. Now remember, an array is also a type of JavaScript object because everything in JavaScript is an object except primitives. More on that later. Inside of here, we have objects, or more particularly object literals. And again, we're going to discern what this really means. What does it mean to say everything in JavaScript is an object except for primitives? So we have this array of objects or object literals, and the task was to run it through this function and to log out some messages. So we're going to see how well Copilot does with this. I'm actually just going to paste in the directions for the homework, and let's see which looping method Copilot decides to go with. Okay, and then here we have a couple of linting errors. Well, I'm going to hit Command S, and that'll clean up most of it. Now, this one is really kind of picky. We are using the Airbnb style guide, and there's this policy there where you can't use this unary operator, and all that means is you need to do this way. It's really a picky rule. I'm not even going to go over why the edge case of why they even bring that up, but just if you get hit with that linter warning, just use I plus equals. Again, this means take the current value of I, throw it out, and create a new piece of data with one more than the previous value of I. And that's why we use let in these for loops, because we can't use const, right? If I try to make this const, that's not going to work, because as soon as I get here, it's going to say, hey, I can't do that. I can't reassign the value associated with I because you made it const. Now in here, this is fine. This is const. You might look at this and say, well, wait a minute, isn't this also being reassigned as we iterate over? Aren't we bringing in the next person in the people array? And that's true, but the thing is, this is a isolated block of code with this for loop, and so it's perfectly fine to reassign to a const within the scope of the for loop. So with that, let's just run this code and make sure that it's doing what we expect it to do. We'll make this a little bit bigger, and we'll run this with node and the name of the file, index.js, and this looks like it's working just fine. So in this case, Copilot decided to solve this with a for loop. And this is fine as an introduction to how loops work, but it's really not, we can do a lot better. We can do a lot better than just doing a for loop and having to iterate over this I. Just break this down a little bit more to make sure we're fully aware of this before we go and do something else. So again, we're starting at I equals 0. Why do we start at 0? Well, because an array is 0 index. So this is the first element in the array. We're starting here. The first time this loop runs, we're working with John, age 17. So we start off with 0, and we check our exit condition. Have we reached the length of the people? Well, apparently not, because we're just starting. It's literally 0 right now. And so after the loop runs, we're going to come back through, throw out the 0, and bring in index 1, index 2, index 3. So that's generally how our for loop works. Now, each time this thing runs, we're using bracket notation to go to the people array and pass in the index, 0, 1, 2, 3. So in the case of 0, again, person is going to be John with an age of 17. We then go in here to verify adulthood, and verify adulthood is looking for a name. In fact, I'm just going to shorten these up. I'm just going to make this name and age now. Right, we can call these anything that we want. Actually, I won't do that. So I got to replace all the others. The point is, the names of these parameters have absolutely nothing directly to do with anything else in this code. We could call these parameters elephant and ant, monkey and giraffe. It doesn't even matter. We wouldn't do that because we want to use sensible names. But to emphasize, this function is completely self contained. It does not reach outside of its scope to do its job, and it has a clean return statement here. That makes this function a pure function. More on that later. At any rate, as we're going through our loop, we pull each person in, index by index, one at a time, until we reach the length. And each time we do that, we're going into the person, we're accessing the name property and the age property. So whatever this name is, it gets bound to this placeholder or parameter called person name, but it could have been called giraffe. We go in here and say person.age, and the same thing happens. So here we have our conditional true false statement, and we either return when a welcome or return you're not old enough to enter. So that gives us a summary of a pretty clean loop, something we can do here to loop over arrays. And this sets us up to go over a few more topics and then improve on the way that we're doing this loop and the way that we're working with iterating over an array.